Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Here at the Table. That's HEAR, Here at the Table, a podcast brought to you by the Cathedral of the Rockies communication team.
Let's
My
go.
favorite team.
Best team.
I am here as one of your hosts. My name is Naki, and also with me is...
Jen Binford, one of the pastors here.
And finally...
Alex Street, not one of the pastors here, but a delighted member of the communications team and also a member of the Amity team, which is also an elite team.
Agreed.
In my personal opinion.
Agreed.
Elite team.
Look at you. Part of two elite teams.
It's like Michael Jordan.
I was going to say Michael Jordan.
It's like Michael Jordan being on the Chicago Bulls while also playing on the U.S. Olympic basketball team. Perfect.
There you go.
And he played
That's
baseball.
me. People
Anyway.
always look at me and they say Michael Jordan.
That's what I think of when I see you.
All joking aside, as you may remember, part of this podcast is that we are gathered here together around the table to wrestle with just what it means to follow Jesus in a modern day and age. Last time we began going through the Emmaus passage in Luke. And before we move further in the story, we will do a little bit more of a deep dive in the rest of our lens of HEAR. Last time we talked quite a bit about the historical context, and today we will look at some of the enduring principles that we find throughout this passage, as well as ask our big questions. So before we get started, Jen, why don't you go ahead and read that passage for us again?
Sweet. So Luke 24, verse 13 and on for a bit. It says, "Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. And he asked them, 'What are you discussing together as you walk along?' They stood still, their faces downcast. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, 'Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?' 'What things?' he asked. 'About Jesus of Nazareth,' they replied. 'He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and other rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. And in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus.' And he said to them, 'Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?' And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself."
All right. And there we have our passage. Any initial comments from either of you? I know last time we talked at length about some of the historical context of this passage. Did you have anything you wanted to start with, Jen?
When we sit together around the table, listening to one another, reflecting as we're reading, we're listening to hear from each other while listening to the scripture and listening to the Holy Spirit. So for me, this story is actually very reflective of what we're doing, in that we are gathering with Jesus in our midst, in a sense, and we're asking questions and we're seeking to make sense of our own stories and how they fit into the bigger, broader story. We're basically living out right now together what these characters are doing in this.
We're on the couch to Emmaus right now.
That's right. The blue chair sessions.
The blue chair sessions to Emmaus.
We're on the furniture across from Emmaus.
Yes, and it's
Yes.
blue.
My reaction continues from the last time we talked about this, which is just one of my favorite piece is just the sarcasm.
Yes.
The sarcasm coming from the first people, the people that are walking that Jesus appears to, and they're like, where you been, bro? And then the follow-up of Jesus being like, what are you talking about?
Could you imagine if he was like, I don't know, I've been dead for 3 days. What have you been doing? Pacha! And then he
Exactly.
reveals himself.
Mhm.
That would have been a very sassy rendition of this story.
Sassy Jesus. That's really where you and I both really connect with the story.
The sass.
The sassy
When the sass is real.
When we were talking about the model that we're using to handle the word well, the H represents historical context, which is zooming back into the time of the word when it was actually written so that we handle the word well within its realm. And then the E, as we've mentioned before, is enduring principles, and A, asking questions, and the R is remembering the story. And so what we're going to do now is just zoom into the E and the A and kind of mix them all up, because really as we're wrestling together, we're asking questions and trying to make sense of how does this apply today? So what questions do we have? And then as we're going through, we can identify what principles that we can bring into today from this.
So, do we have any enduring principles that we recognize here? And as a reminder, some of the things that we had talked about, maybe a little specific to Cathedral about enduring principles, were things like our all means all. Like those are, I mean, all means all is, you know, a Cathedral like ethos. But very much rooted in scripture. We've talked about values, things that have stuck through either Christianity or things that have been taught in the past that we either need to unlearn and replace with new knowledge, things that are intrinsic to our own biases and things like that. But just things that I guess are timeless. I don't want to say timeless truths, because we've talked about things we may need to unlearn, but timeless, principles is probably the best word for it. So are there things within this that we recognize, as well as what are the big questions?
The one that I wanted to touch on is connection. We see the way that Jesus is interacting with these people in this story, and it's so consistent across the board with how Jesus interacts with everybody that he encounters, in the sense that as much as we think it would be really funny if he just like savagely burned them in his immediate approach and like came full out with like the sass of revealing himself to them, the fact is that he gives them some of the space to build some of that connectional piece. And in fact, he's just spending time walking with them. It's very consistent with the person that Jesus is. And it's so consistent with, I think, how we are called to be those followers of his. Like there's a little condemnation in his tone a little bit later when he calls them like
thick-headed.
Yeah, thick-headed and slow of heart. But there's also the piece where he is giving them a little bit of space to kind of get there and to share what they've been experiencing. And he isn't interrupting some of that, I think they call it in the passage, sadness that they are experiencing. Yeah. There is like that call out later on, but there is at first this connectional piece. And we're reading all of this in just a matter of a few verses that happen. But if we think about the context of that walk, this is something that lasted an extended period of time.
I mean, 7 miles worth of traveling. So
yeah. So it wasn't immediate the way that we're reading it when we're looking at this story. Right. So I just think that is something that helps remind me in the way that annoyingly reminds me in the way that I talk with people and in the way that I approach people, because sometimes I don't want to be patient and sometimes I don't want to be connectional or relational in the conversations that I have. I want to just get to the point and be direct and then move on. Yeah. And get things done and move on as quick as possible, or tell someone immediately that I think their theology is bad or that I think their opinion is wrong. But what's the good that comes from that? And then the other piece is that I was thinking of besides that is also that Jesus is asking questions himself.
Yeah.
So like that's one of our tenets, but he is asking questions, and he is so often asking questions,
Right.
whether it's in the form of telling a parable or whether it's in the form of just turning around something on like the Pharisees or whomever, where it's like, well, don't you think this? What would you do in this situation? Like there's so many examples through the Gospels that we see of that. And I think we see both of these things, this connectional piece, relational piece, and then also that asking questions rather than just telling you right out the gate. And I think those are very enduring to us as followers of Christ and like a good reminder, don't you think?
Yeah. Preach it, bro.
Not trying to preach.
No, that it's so good what you were saying. And Jesus was relational, and he wasn't holding himself with this posture of like, prove me wrong, and kind of the way that we behave. And
which we wish he was. We want to be that person.
But so many people who profess Jesus's name claim that their behavior is in line with him. And for me, I'm like, okay, show me where.
Yeah.
And I don't see it.
Yeah, I agree.
That he's relational, as you said, and his focus is on relational connection to the other person. And I mean, he does call him foolish, but it's more like, hey, your way of seeing things. And he does it in a way that is invitational to them. And he takes the time to earn that connection so that he can be heard.
Yeah.
And whenever we see Jesus being frustrated or angry, it is often for the right reasons.
Right.
Like he does not come at, the woman at the well or the woman caught in adultery with anger and like wrath
or shame.
Yeah.
or
right.
shame. Yeah, exactly. But the times when he does express that anger or the, calling these guys, slow-hearted and what was it? Thick-headed or whatever it was.
I think.
Yeah. Or, flipping tables in the temple. I mean, it is about inviting people into. He is getting frustrated at people not remembering who they are and who they are called to be. Like he is mad in the temple that the temple has become a marketplace, a commerce point, and that they are exploiting people. And then he is mad in this moment that these people are expressing, well, we wanted him to redeem Israel. We wanted him to be this mighty conqueror. And he's saying, do you not remember what is written down?
Yeah.
In
like all of the prophets, he talks essentially Moses and all of the prophets who continued after, like to your point, also in those moments where we'll say they, but also we forget who we are. And when we and they forget, in your words, what we're called to be, like you are also in that moment forgetting who God is. And you're forgetting who Jesus is, because because we are created in God's image, like meaning from that moment we are born, there is marked within us this image of who we can be. And I think some of that like upset, some of that like, are you kidding me, guys? Are you kidding me? Is kind of see him like with his fingers in his hair, just like at his wit's end and realizing like you are forgetting the very most important things. It is that frustration of, honestly, I a little bit remember in The Lion King, remember who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's that. It's like,
Mhm.
remember where you come from. Remember where you are being called to go and who you come from and who you are intended to be.
Right. So I guess maybe the question I hear us wrestling through, to name it directly, is how did Jesus engage with people?
Yeah.
And so far, what I've heard us say is he relationally connects to others and he wrestles with them,
Mm-hmm.
meaning they're asking questions. He's asking, they're asking, and they're really trying to just process together through a lens of scripture and what they know the story to be thus far.
Like recognizing that he asks questions rather than just giving answers. Like he wrestles with them.
Right.
He isn't just, with the questions they have, well, this is the answer. Like he says, do you not remember? And is essentially modeling how to wrestle, how to ask the questions. And Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things, but we like easy things, please and thank you. So that is just one of those moments where Jesus is willing to model the difficulty of the way by wrestling with them.
Right. So maybe the enduring principle has something to do with what it looks like to be disciples, is that we are engaging in the process of discovery, we talk about at Cathedral. They're discovering, and Jesus participates in that process as part of that as well. Is he's present, engaging in the process with us as we're seeking to discover more of who he is and more of God's story and how we fit into it.
We're talking about the story to Emmaus. We have one of our worship spaces here at the church is called the Emmaus Center, but this isn't really necessarily happening in Emmaus. This is on the way to Emmaus. So why do you think we have a building named after Emmaus? Why do we have the Emmaus Center?
So, thinking about what happens in these buildings where we're gathering as God's people, we are God's disciples, right? And as we said before, that this is a model, the road to Emmaus really is a model for discipleship and who we are as disciples of Christ. And when we gather as two or more, we are basically engaging in this process. And it's the process of discovery, of learning. And we're all teachers and we're all learners, as we say, and we're seeking. Jesus says, I am the way. And so the discipleship, we talk about it at Cathedral as the journey. So on the road to Emmaus, they're on the journey with Jesus in their midst. We are living into the new way of Jesus. And so I would say that's why it's known throughout history that oftentimes churches do name buildings and rooms the Emmaus such and such, because this is a model of discipleship. And again, that's our mission, is to go make disciples and create spaces of community that support that in all of our spaces, every space, even this space that we're in right now, that's kind of like a loungy space, supposedly my office, but turned it into more of a living room. And I did it on purpose because it supports the concept of a culture where we're listening and learning from one another. Maybe I should have called it the Emmaus Lounge.
It just would have been confusing.
I know.
The signage
We have
would
to.
have been
Yeah.
impossible. Yeah.
I know who makes the signs.
I know. That's you. JK.
I don't know the best way to go about this, but there's a tension that I experience within myself when I think about accompaniment and journey, and like listening to what you were talking about, like we as a church disciple one another. And the tension that I'm feeling is remembering my story of faith. I was actually thinking about like asking you both the question of who is someone who has helped really disciple you? But I don't actually want to know the answer to that question anymore. Maybe at a later time, because instead the question that I realized as I thought about that, I kind of thought about how would I answer that question? And I could come up with some
Sure.
really good examples of people who have had a very positive impact. But there's also so many people who, through my journey through faith, I can either look back on it through a binary and I can say, wow, that person was really influential in my faith at the moment. But I look back and see how toxic some of that was. So, you know what? That was negative.
Sure.
Right.
But I don't think it's that easy. I
Yeah.
think we have all come from a place where we have experienced some negativity in community. And so the question is, how do we, when we look through our own journeys through discipleship, because our hope is to become better.
Right.
We want to be better, authentic disciples, meaning authentic to ourselves and authentic to the teachings of Jesus. But when we look back through our own journey and we have that tension of really negative moments or some negative theology that really got interwoven into how we related to our community and how we related to God,
Yeah.
how do we process that tension without just throwing it all away?
Yeah.
Because I think I've tried to throw most of it away, like a lot of that previous stuff. And the more that it's like, the more that I kind of progress through, the more that I realize like I can't throw those life experiences away. They were a part of me and they shaped so much
Yeah.
of who I am now. So like how do you both like reflect and think on that, like that tension of what you've experienced in the past?
I never thought I would quote Glennon Doyle twice in one episode.
But I love her.
Let's hear it.
I think the way for me personally, because also I am one more person who has suffered immensely at the hands of church and at the hands of people within those churches. Because there is so much negative, you do just want to toss all of the experience and just, I mean, on a level, pretend it never happened, I think probably because so much pain came from some of those experiences. I grew up a pastor's kid. And so, I mean, truly born and raised in church. Like, there was never a moment of my life until I decided to step away from church that I was ever outside of the church. And that didn't come until I was in my upper 20s. I mean, as a kid, like, I loved church, like not all, but like the majority of my friends were at church. Like, all of the adults in my life who made me feel loved, all of them, aside from probably my direct school teacher growing up and whatever grade I had been in. Like, these were all people that I just loved and were huge in my formative years. And, eventually you leave, you go away, you come back and you do all those things. You discover more about who you are. And when I discovered the part of the core of who I was and finally let myself be that, and just so we're putting all the vagueness out, I'm talking about being gay. And, like that was, that space of belonging was no longer my space of belonging. And it broke my heart. And now we get to Glennon Doyle, who says the thing that breaks your heart is the very thing you were born to help heal. The journey of me even ending back up, like stepping foot in a church, much less becoming a part of that church and then working at said church. And the way I craft Sunday services, all of that is with this quote at the forefront of my mind and at the forefront of my heart. And that, We say it in our morning announcements. If you're looking for a home church or if you're looking for a space to belong, we hope your search can end here. Every Sunday, the worship team, 5 minutes till service begins, we step into the back and we pray. And part of that prayer is always through music. Today, let us create a space where people feel safe, loved, and a sense of belonging so that they can let go and connect to what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would not be doing that if I threw out all of the bad experiences. If I threw out all of the relationships, all of the situations, all of the judgment, all of the harm that broke my heart, then I wouldn't be here doing what I could to help heal broken hearts, but also to make sure our institution isn't breaking hearts. And so, I think part of it is we can't throw those things away if we want to be effective at changing our little corners of the world. I have no idea if that answers your question.
I think it does.
One of the enduring principles that is very key and critical in the process is to be reflective. Really, what we're, in a sense, doing is trying to make sense of our stories and how it fits in. And for me, one of the things that breaks my heart the most is misdiscipling. And it grieves me. I think about it most every day. The misunderstanding of the storyline and misdiscipling in a way, it's almost like there's this need to redisciple in a healthier way. And so I think the framework of how I see this is more, we're not necessarily discipling one another, that we are on the journey together being discipled by Jesus. And so that's where I guess I would, because it's different in a sense that that I'm not necessarily being discipled by you, I'm being discipled with you.
Right.
And so I think maybe that frees me to extend grace to the people who I had thought before I was functioning from a framework that they were discipling me and they were like the expert teachers and they were supposed to be the models in my story of ethical health. I don't even know, like
a moral health.
Yeah, like of the moral ethical code that of above reproach as leaders in the church, when in reality there was a lot of immaturity that was displayed and caused a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of harm.
Sure.
And I think part of it is, as Americans, we want the right answers. Mm-hmm. But that is not what we see Jesus doing in this passage. He's reflecting and wrestling, and he does eventually come and help them make sense from the storyline perspective, but he's not doing it in a way like, hey, you're such an idiot. He really is inviting us into this process. And since we're quoting people, I'll shout out to my older brother. Something that he says often is that people really are doing the best they can based on where they are. Yeah. And so he tells me that often as a reminder when I'm struggling with forgiving people. And there are people who have caused harm and hurt. But when I look back on the storyline of where they are in their stories, they're functioning out of how they understand the story and their core principles, which are not aligned with mine. And one of those, just to name, is we were discipled mostly by our culture as Americans, and Americans value being right and having all the right answers. Yeah. That's not the process.
It's also just not that culture. Yeah. Just a reminder, Jesus is not and was not American.
Oh, thank you.
What? Crazy. Jesus is not American. How dare you? I think so much of what you're both saying is so helpful and insightful to anybody who is still struggling with some of that.
Sure.
But then it's like, it's going to require that element of like grace or forgiveness. And like, that's everyone else's unique journey to determine whether they're at the point. Cause like, I'm not always at the point with some people to extend that yet. And I know that I am called to emulate that because that is what Jesus does. But like, that's hard. It's hard to look back over a life and see some of those experiences that you've had that have been really hard and to still be able to find not value, but to find something worth keeping out of that.
Yeah.
And to find love for some of those people that caused some of that harm unintentionally. I think it's probably a lot harder to find love for the people who caused intentional harm.
Yeah.
But that's more rare.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know that people were doing it intentionally.
Yeah. And I've thought about this before in my life too, because I spent a lot of years as a youth minister and I look back on it and like youth ministry is so wild because you basically take, and I'm speaking about myself here. So like I did that job for a long time. You basically are taking the least qualified person.
I know. It's like, how old were you when you started?
19. I was a 19-year-old middle school youth minister overseeing a program. I was the adult in the room, even though there were older adults in the room. Like I was the one that those older adults looked to say, so what are we doing? And like, so I'm just saying, for me, as someone who has been a youth minister for a long time, who started this, I think it's funny that you oftentimes in youth ministry, you are taking the least qualified person in the room. You are putting them in with the most impressionable audience that you could possibly.
Their most informative years.
and like their most vulnerable years too.
Yeah, good
like
point.
the most impressionable, the most in need of good information. And you're often putting the person who has like the least life experience and the least qualification to be able to provide insightful and good information. And I was that person often in that space. Like I look back on it and I'm sure that I did and said some things or repeated patterns that unintentionally caused harm to some of those youth through some of the theological pieces that I was, that had been told to me
and I was bought into.
That I was bought into had been told to me and that I was regurgitating back to them. Yeah, it's just it's hard when you look back on that overall journey of discipleship and think about, I feel like that's been the big piece for me is that I no longer am at the place where I'm like, okay, I just need to throw everything out from before I found myself in this space. But accepting some of that stuff from the past is still very challenging.
This is why we recommend partnering the discipleship journey with therapy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Truly.
Amen. Yeah, really.
Truly.
And
Like it sounds like I'm being sarcastic or joking, but I'm not.
No, we're all big proponents of that. I almost said opponents. We are all big proponents of licensed therapy.
And there's no rush in your healing process, right?
But I do think there is such a distinct wisdom in what you said and what your brother said, in that, in fact, can you repeat it again?
Yeah, that people are doing the best they can based on where they are.
Right.
And the maturity they have in the moment. And he may have been referencing our parents.
I was like, if it helps, it's very Brene Brown coded too. So like, also,
which I doubt
your brother
actually
and
knows.
Brene Brown say this.
Yeah, I doubt he knows who that is. But through this whole reflection process in his story and in mine, and trying to make and forgiveness, really. But they really were doing the best they could based on where they were. One of my close friends more recently asked me something that was really hard. And that is, have you forgiven the former you? And that's where what was meant by this question is, now that I'm older and have been further along in this process of understanding the storyline, I understood it different. And so the way I was living out my faith was kind of judgy and focused more on one piece of the story. And so then the way that I would disciple today or participate in the discipleship journey and the way that I would communicate that And what I'm referencing is like Sunday school or being afraid of people just in general who look different than me or had
Sure.
different understandings or were a little too edgy. It was coming out of just where I was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing the best that I could based on where I was and how I understood the story. And it was very immature and very simple. It was a simple faith that was this little tiny box. And I stayed in my little box and realized later in life that I was caged.
Yeah.
But part of that is just forgiving ourselves really in our stories as we move along.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to keep that in mind. It's
And-
important for me to keep in mind.
I mean, I think we truly see that exact thing modeled when Jesus tells them, like, he's essentially saying in the scripture, remember the enduring principle, because he is saying, like, it's the question that he asks when they answer his question of what things happened. And he starts to, I think this is once he has, he's taken the gloves off a little bit and told them, you know, like, they're slow to remember. And he essentially tells them, like, remember what you know is true. And he reminds them to think through what Moses and all of the prophets said. Like, he's actually referring them back to an enduring principle, an enduring truth of who God is, of who God promised, which is, you know, they say later in this, like, we had hoped he was the Messiah. We had hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel, but like, he didn't come in this military might. Like, instead he ends up, you know, murdered in the most shameful way a person can be murdered. And he is reminding them, even in this moment, remember what you know is true or what you believe. Even though he's doing it with a little bit of sass at this point, he is telling them, like, remember the story, remember the narrative of everything that you have read and been taught and have, you know, we mentioned in the previous episode that they have grown up in Jewish communities. They are well aware of how this story goes. And he is reminding them, like, you have to remember all of the things that you've grown up with, the things that you've known are true.
It seems like we continue to touch on how did Jesus engage with people. And so far, we've identified that he is relationally connecting. They're asking questions, they're dialoguing together. But something we haven't said is that he gives them permission to be right where they are in their stories. And he's not really, shaming them in any way. Do you not think so?
The tiny little...
No, just the language. He shames them a little bit with the call out language.
And he
That's true.
calls them a fool. Like, yeah.
The different biblical translations all have lots of different, like, very poetic, delightful ways of how he calls them
I
out.
think that you can call one another out without experiencing shame. So I don't see this as shame. To me,
I would agree with that. Yeah.
it's like, hey, ding dong. Can you
Yeah.
say ding dong? I don't know.
I think so. Well, it's
think
like
so.
Ashley's thing.
I don't think we'll get sued by Hostess.
For
Goofball, like,
everybody
hey.
who was like, Ashley's my wife. So like
Dum
hers
dum.
is dummy. She's
Yeah.
like, hey, dummy. And I'm like,
dummy.
Okay, let's say that. Hey, dummy. I'm just so cautious now because I
Yeah.
hang out with teenagers and they'll often tell me the other day I said something and I won't even say it because apparently now means often I say silly things like that and they're like, you can't say that. I'm like, why? What does that mean? I'm like, no, it doesn't. That's what it means to your
Yeah.
generation. But to our generation, it means this whole other encyclopedia that's like playful and innocent. So that's where that's coming from as a side note. But
language.
I see him giving them permission to be where they are in their journeys and redirecting them towards a healthier perspective. And I guess when I think about this too, something that Americans versus followers of Jesus cling to is striving to be the best, I guess. And really, this isn't a journey of striving. It's a journey of discovering and maturing into
growth.
wholeness. Yes. And growth into what we were created and designed, which is wholeness in God's presence. Yeah. What else?
So then one question that I want to ask is we're talking about discipleship and some of the benefits of that accompaniment where we join together to grow. What are some of the ways that you both feel like you have most benefited from having a church community and being connected to other people on this path of discipleship rather than trying to do it yourself?
I have a very high sense of wonder and curiosity. And so, in the last maybe 4 years, particularly, I have God has provided people in my life who let me just do this with them, that I can sit around the table and we just wonder together and ask really hard questions that I have that don't make any sense, and I'm not shamed for it. Those who have helped me grow in my journey have given me permission to be where I am, to be angry at the church and to experience grief, and also help me to wrestle through questions through a biblical lens and carry themselves. I don't want to really use the word behave, but carry themselves in a way that I want to learn from. It's that posture of humility and curiosity and the heart of service. The people that I'm really drawn to right now are people who see the oppressed and show them value, because that's my deepest value, that will engage with the homeless person,
Mhm.
and just engage with them as if they were somebody who their next door neighbor or whatever. Yeah, so that's what I would say is who helped me grow to be mature by being with me and where I'm at in my story.
Yeah. Cool. Aki?
I think the first thing that this congregation, this church, specifically Cathedral of the Rockies, they gave me back the belief that the church can do good and not just harm. I came here at a very weird time, which was as things were reopening in COVID, and we live in Idaho, so we don't always encounter positive responses to things like the vaccines. At the time, like we were all also like that's when mask mandates were in place and things like that. Just being part of the first responder community, we were offered vaccines, and the amount of people who were so indignant at being offered the vaccine was very confusing and off-putting for me. Uh, and and because like nobody was ever required to do it, and in my experience, like there were like culturally within the sheriff's office, there weren't really lines drawn of like whether you got it or you didn't get it, meaning the initial round of vaccines and things like that. Tons and tons of uh, resistance to wearing masks and essentially just trying to help keep one another healthy because, you know, these are jobs that other people can't do them. You know, like 911 dispatching is a highly specialized, very difficult job to do. And it takes like there is one personality and one personality only that really works for dispatching. And so it was one of those things where, you know, and at these times, like if you got sick at all, like your quarantine was 2 weeks after being sick, you know, or after traveling and things like that. And like why like one person being out for 2 weeks could really wipe out our staffing and things like that. Anyway, all of that. And walking into Cathedral for the first time and seeing the Love Your Neighbor Wear a Mask, watching UMCOR's efforts to send vaccines, you know, like it just like Cathedral, this congregation specifically, not like the institution of Cathedral, but the people of Cathedral who are attending services, singing songs, listening to sermons, like those are the people who showed me who the church actually is, and that it could be a community that heals a broken heart, not causes a broken heart, like which the church can do both. Like we have said that at length at this point, but, first and foremost, this church just gave me, I showed up here for the first time fully as an atheist, and I could not stop coming back because I loved the community so much.
And now you can't get enough of learning about Jesus.
I love to learn. So, so it just like more than anything, they gave me, the people of our church gave me a community to feel safe with in many ways, as who I identified as well as somebody who cared about my health as well as other people's health. And just like, I got into 911 dispatching because I wanted to do good in the world. And I ended up promoting out of the actual job and was managing by the time I started here. And I just felt this vacancy of the good that I wanted to do in the world. And through all of the things Cathedral does, like it gave me a chance to do that again in a meaningful way.
How about for you?
For me, there is a beauty in being a part of like a church community, probably just about any church community you would find this in, but it's the diversity of spending a lot of time with people that you would not normally choose to socialize with. Like as a millennial, most of my closest friends are millennials. There's some Gen Z folk in my life. There's some Gen X folk in my life that I spend time with, but not a lot of people who are older that I regularly would choose to socialize with. There's a couple, but to be able to just have a place where you can form some intergenerational connection, like once a week or multiple times a week, and get to know people who are in a very different place in life than I am, I think has been really positive for me. We often look to whatever elders are in our life. I think a lot of people look to their parents when they're kind of going through different seasons in life and progressing, and they're looking for that example, or I don't want to speak for other people. For me, like I often look at my parents and am kind of wanting to emulate some of those things, but I'm a different person than them. I can't emulate everything that they do. And so by having just this community of other people around me, it's almost like you can gain wisdom from people from all sorts of different backgrounds that you would not normally have found, or that I would not have normally found if I was just looking within my own family. And I think that has been really beneficial. And then not to be just like super basic, but annoyingly, every once in a while, one of our pastors says something in a sermon where I go, oh, that's a good point. And it really drives me nuts because every once in a while they say something and I'm like, oh, that is interesting. Or like, oh, that changes my perspective a little bit, which I know is their goal and it's what they're aiming for. But sometimes I like to
We're the tough crowd.
Yeah. Naki and I are very tough critics. And I like to sit back, and for the most part, we've been in so many church services for so many times through so many years that oftentimes we can adopt that a little bit of the cynical take of like, oh, I've heard it all before.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while they break through with something where you're like, oh, that got me. And you hate getting got.
Why you? No.
But you enjoy getting got because you get something good out of it.
It's true. That's the theme. We love getting got.
Yep.
Amen.
That's the name of this episode.
There you go. We love getting got. Well, thanks, friends. Another good conversation. As a reminder, next time we will move into our Remember the Story in the same passage, as well as hopefully getting into the ending of it with the big reveal. But as always, thanks for listening to this episode of Here, HEAR, at the Table. This podcast is a production of the amazing Cathedral of the Rockies communications team. Cathedral of the Rockies is a United Methodist church located in Boise, Idaho. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to get future episodes, and please share them with anyone you think could benefit from this conversation as well. If you'd like to reach out to us, please follow Cathedral of the Rockies on Instagram and or Facebook, and you can also find us online at cathedraloftherockies.org. And soon.